right. So you want to be an aquaculture husbandry manager.
A fascinating career path.
You sent us a ton of research on this,
Yeah, it seems like more than just a passing interest.
which tells us you're serious about exploring this whole thing.
Definitely not just about working with fish, though.
Right. It's way bigger than that.
It's about sustainable food production, for sure.
And of course, environmental responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. Can't forget that.
Plus, let's be honest, there's some really cool science involved.
Totally. This isn't your grandma's backyard fish pond.
Not even close.
This is about understanding those intricate balances,
And the aquatic ecosystems.
Exactly. And then you're applying scientific knowledge on top of that.
To help these species thrive.
Optimize growth, yeah.
And make sure they're healthy.
Their well-being is a huge part of it.
So, let's break it down. What does an aquaculture husbandry manager actually do?
All day, every day.
Well, the sources mentioned feeding, growth, and stock management, but
There's got to be more to it than that.
it can't be as simple as just like scattering fish food and calling it a day, right?
Yeah, right. It's definitely more complex. Think of it more like this. You're managing essentially every single part of the on-growing process.
On-growing process. That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, it's straight from one of the sources you sent.
Yeah.
And it really gets at that whole life cycle you're managing.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So what does that actually look like?
Well, think about feeding schedules, for example.
You mean like how much to feed them?
It's way more than just that. You have to factor in the specific species.
Oh, right, because different fish eat different things.
And then their age, how old they are, impacts how much and what they need.
Makes sense.
And then you've got water conditions to consider.
Right, like temperature and all that.
Exactly. Temperature, oxygen levels, pH, it all plays a role.
Wow, so you're like a fish doctor, chef, and environmental engineer all rolled into one.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget about biosecurity.
Biosecure.
Yeah, that's a big one. Preventing and controlling diseases.
Oh, right, because if one fish gets sick,
It can spread like wildfire.
so you've got to be on top of all those potential outbreaks.
Exactly.
Sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It really is. And speaking of balance,
One of the sources mentioned sustainable and ethical practices.
which is huge.
So I'm curious, what are some concrete examples of how those principles are being put into practice in aquaculture?
Well, one big one that's really cool is the growing use of these things called recirculating aquaculture system.
Recirculating aquaculture systems, what are those?
They call them RAS for short. Basically, they filter and reuse the water.
So less waste.
Way less. It minimizes the environmental impact significantly.
That's awesome.
Another interesting trend is integrated multi-trophic aquaculture.
Now that's a mouthful.
Hmm.
What is that one all about?
So picture this. You've got different species all raised together.
Like a little underwater community.
Exactly. But here's the cool part. It's symbiotic, meaning they all benefit from each other, like the waste from the fish.
What about it?
It can be used to actually fertilize seaweed or shellfish.
Wow. So nothing goes to waste.
Exactly. It's about creating a more sustainable, efficient, and balanced process.
So it's not just about taking from nature.
It's about working with nature.
I love that. It's like closing the loop,
Good.
creating this amazing little ecosystem. I can definitely see why this career path is so appealing. Speaking of appealing, one thing that caught my eye in the source material was that this job is, and I quote, primarily outdoors.
Yeah, that's a big part of the job description for sure.
So I got to ask, what does that really mean for someone who's picturing themselves in this role?
Like, what kind of outdoors are we talking about?
Exactly. Are we talking like picturesque seaside views, ocean breezes, all that good stuff?
I mean, sometimes, yeah.
Or are we talking something, well, a bit less glamorous?
It's a mix, honestly. You're going to be working with water no matter what.
That's a given.
Some days you might be out on the open water.
Like at one of those net pen salmon farms.
Yeah, exactly. But then other days you could be at a land-based facility.
The recirculating aquaculture systems we talked about?
Oh, those ones.
Yes.
So the point is, you've got to be ready for anything.
Weather-wise, you mean?
Weather, definitely. Early mornings are pretty much a guarantee.
Well, I can imagine.
And then there's the physical aspect of it, too.
Okay, so it's not all idyllic sunsets over perfectly still fish ponds.
Not quite. It can be demanding. Which brings us to skills.
Right, because you need a certain kind of person to handle all that, right?
Absolutely. We touched on the biology background earlier, which is crucial.
Marine biology, ecology, all that good stuff.
For sure. But you need practical skills, too.
Like what? Give me an example.
Problem solving, for one. Things come up. Unexpected stuff, and you got to figure it out on the fly.
I bet.
Critical thinking, too. You're constantly analyzing data, making decisions based on what you're seeing.
You mentioned data analysis earlier, and I wanted to circle back to that. One of the sources actually highlighted the importance of data skills in aquaculture, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's more and more important these days.
It's like that in so many fields now, but it's not something people always associate with, like working on a fish farm.
Right, but think about it. You're tracking growth rates.
You're adjusting those feeding regimes based on the data.
And you're monitoring water quality, all those parameters. It's all data.
So you're using those biology skills, but in this really practical, data-driven way.
Exactly.
It's like a whole other layer to the job.
It is. And honestly, that's part of what makes it so interesting. There's always something new to learn.
So for someone listening right now, picturing themselves, waders on, surrounded by all these amazing fish,
Living the dream.
what's step one?
Yeah.
Like, what do you actually need to do to get there?
To become an aquaculture husbandry manager.
Exactly.
Hmm.
What kind of education are we talking about? And what about experience?
So the good news is the sources you sent, they actually lay out a pretty clear path.
Oh, that's helpful.
It is. Usually it starts with a bachelor's degree.
Okay, makes sense. In what, though?
A related field, for sure. Marine biology is always a good bet.
Classic.
Aquaculture, obviously.
Of course.
Even fisheries science can be a good foundation.
Interesting. And then on top of that, you mentioned earlier how this whole field is becoming super data-driven.
It really is.
So would taking some extra courses in, like statistics or data analysis, be a smart move?
It wouldn't hurt.
Give you an edge.
Totally. The more comfortable you are with data, the better.
It's amazing how data analysis is everywhere these days.
It's true. But it's not just about what you learn in a classroom.
Right, we talked about hands-on experience, too.
Exactly. Internships, volunteer work.
That kind of stuff.
Can't overstate how important that is.
So how crucial are those experiences, really?
One of the sources actually quoted a career guide. I thought it was spot on. They said, seek internships or volunteer opportunities at aquaculture farms or research facilities.
So get your hands dirty, literally.
Exactly. That's where you'll learn to apply what you learned in those textbooks to real-life situations.
Make those connections.
And build those problem-solving skills, because trust me.
You need them?
Oh, yeah. Stuff happens on a fish farm, things you'd never expect. You gotta be able to think on your feet.
It's that classic combo, right? Book smarts and street smarts.
Exactly. Or, I guess, fish farm smart.
Fish farm smarts. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've put in the work, you've got the degree, you've got some experience. What happens next? What's the actual career progression look like?
So, typically you'll start in an entry-level role.
Like an assistant of some kind.
Sometimes. Aquaculture technician is a common one.
Okay.
And from there, you can climb that ladder,
More responsibility as you go.
Assistant manager, maybe farm manager down the line.
If you're at a bigger company, what then?
You could even become director of aquaculture operations.
Wow. So lots of potential for growth, specialization, all that.
Definitely.
Now, before we wrap up, I've got to ask about this tool you mentioned in the research, RoleCatcher.
Right, yeah. RoleCatcher, that's a good one.
It seemed like this platform could be super helpful for anyone who's serious about landing one of these aquaculture husbandry manager jobs.
Oh, for sure.
So for someone who's never heard of it, what is it?
It's this really cool AI-powered career platform. They've got all sorts of resources, to help you navigate the whole job search process.
Which can be a beast.
Totally. Especially these days. But what I thought was really cool was how RoleCatcher can actually analyze job descriptions.
Get in there and break them down.
Yeah. And then it suggests ways to tweak your resume and your cover letter.
To make you a perfect match.
Exactly. And make sure you're highlighting all the right skills and experience, the stuff that those specific employers are looking for.
That's amazing. It's like having a secret weapon in your back pocket.
Right. It takes some of the guesswork out of the equation.
I love it. So to wrap things up, it seems like we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the education you need, the skills that'll set you apart, and even some cool tech tools to give you an edge in your job search. But I think, more importantly, what we really uncovered is the why behind all of this. What kind of impact do you want to make on the world? Are you passionate about creating sustainable food systems for the future? Or maybe you're driven by the idea of restoring fragile aquatic ecosystems. Whatever it is, hold on to that passion as you navigate this exciting career path. Because that passion, that drive, that's what's going to fuel your success in this increasingly vital field.